You've seen them, right? Those absolutely incredible and honestly terrifying shots of giant wildfires in documentaries. And you have to wonder, how in the world did they get that footage? Is it just insane luck, or is there something else going on? Well, today we're diving straight into that burning question.
I know, it's a shocking thing to even ask, but people do ask it. Do film crews, chasing that one perfect, dramatic shot, actually go out and commit arson? It totally sounds like a wild conspiracy theory, right? Except this suspicion is actually rooted in a very real, very public accusation.
That's right. Just a few years ago, in 2019, this exact scenario just blew up in the headlines. 4 volunteer firefighters, of all people, were arrested down in the Brazilian Amazon. The charge? That they were starting fires just so they could film them. And this case is the perfect place for us to start digging.
All right, so let's really unpack this story. This is the case of the Alter Brigade. And wow, does it reveal a lot about how the line between filmmaking and, fake news can get seriously, dangerously blurred.
So the accusation was just explosive. These volunteers were supposedly setting fires to sell the footage and drum up donations. But the motive behind the accusation, well, that was just as telling. It turned out to be a politically motivated hit job, an attempt to make environmental groups look bad. And in the end, the whole case just completely fell apart. There was literally zero evidence. The volunteers were totally exonerated, and that whole conspiracy theory just went up in smoke.
Okay, so that real-world case turned out to be a total fabrication. But that leads us to the next pretty logical question. Why don't professional film crews do this? And the answer, like it so often is, really comes down to cold, hard cash and just catastrophic levels of risk.
I mean, can you even imagine being personally on the hook for tens of millions of dollars? Because that is the reality we are talking about. If a filmmaker illegally lit a fire and it got out of control, the financial liability would be absolutely life-ruining. This, more than anything else, is the #1 reason this just doesn't happen.
See, it all comes down to insurance. Every single professional film shoot has it. But guess what? There is no policy on planet Earth that covers a criminal act like arson. The second a fire is started illegally, that insurance policy is totally void. And that means the production company, even the individual people involved, would be personally responsible for every single cent of damage. It's a gamble no legitimate production would ever take.
Okay, so if they aren't a bunch of criminals setting the world ablaze, how do they capture those unbelievable, right-up-in-your-face images of these massive infernos? Well, let's pull back the curtain and look at Hollywood's actual playbook. It really boils down to 3 main tactics. They either film something called a controlled burn, they embed with firefighters and wait for the real thing to happen, or they just use a little bit of good old-fashioned movie magic. Let's break each of those down.
All right, so the industry standard, the thing they do most often, is film what's called a prescribed or controlled burn. These are fires that are set on purpose by professionals for really important ecological reasons, like, clearing out the underbrush to stop actual catastrophic wildfires from happening later. So film crews team up with these agencies to get their shots in a completely safe, legal, and controlled environment.
And right here, this is where the deception really begins. What we see on our screens looks like a chaotic, spontaneous disaster. But what was actually happening on set is the complete opposite. A meticulously planned event where filmmakers are working right alongside the experts in a totally safe space.
This quote just nails it. The fire itself is real, absolutely. But the context they build around it, that's completely manufactured. The real magic trick happens in the editing room, with clever cuts and a dramatic voiceover that transforms a routine procedure into this huge life-or-death crisis. So the flames weren't the lie, but the story they told you about them, that definitely was.
But, of course, there are other ways to do it. Some film crews, they just play the waiting game. They'll actually train with firefighters and then wait to safely film a real, naturally occurring fire when one breaks out. And then you've got pure movie magic. The BBC, for instance, digitally added computer-generated fire in its Serengeti series to keep the animals safe. And then shows like Man vs. Wild have used practical effects, hot coals, smoke machines, to simulate danger that just isn't really there.
Now we have to be super clear about something. Fires are sometimes started in connection with media. But we need to draw a very, very sharp line between professional documentary productions and the rogue actors who are actually out there doing this stuff. These are the exceptions that prove the rule.
So look, fires do sometimes happen on film sets, but it's almost always because of some tragic accident or negligence, not a director screaming action on an arsonist. The horrible fire on the Motherless Brooklyn set, for example, was supposedly caused by illegal electrical work. And then you have the much darker phenomenon of the hero arsonist. These are individuals who start fires specifically to create a media story starring themselves.
And these aren't just hypotheticals. These are real, documented cases. Just in 2023, a guy in Canada started 14 wildfires just so he could post about them on social media to prove his conspiracy theories. Even more chilling is the story of John Leonard Orr, a high-ranking fire captain in California who is also one of the most prolific arsonists of the 20th century. He set thousands of fires, all for fame. These are the real fire starters, and they are a world away from documentary filmmakers.
So, let's bring this all together. We've seen that the whole myth of the filmmaker arsonist is just that, a myth. It was kicked off by a false accusation in Brazil, and it's kept in check by the massive financial risk involved. We now know the real techniques they use. So, what's the big takeaway here?
Here it is, the final takeaway. The deception isn't about how the fire started. The fire you see on screen is often very, very real, filmed during a totally safe and controlled burn. No, the real manipulation, the real lie, happens way after the flames are out. It happens in the editing room. It's the dramatic music, the urgent narration, the clever camera angles that turn a boring, routine event into a terrifying spectacle.
So, the next time you're watching one of those stunning wildfire documentaries, just remember to ask yourself this one question. The footage of the flames on your screen? That might be 100% authentic. But the story they're using those flames to tell you? Well, that might just be the most fabricated part of the entire film.